Hello, everyone, and welcome to lesson 1.8 and the final lesson in our historical foundations unit. And our lesson today is going to talk about historical thinking skills part 2. So, by the end of today's lesson, students will be able to do the following: effectively analyze a document using the OPCVO method by providing the following information about the given document: the origin of the document, the purpose of the document, the content of the document, the values of the document, and the limitations of the document. Please note that value and limitations of documents must be with regard to the origin, purpose, and or content of the document. This will be explained further throughout this lesson, but this is a key concept to note starting out. So, first of all, for many of you, the OPCVO method may be something that you already know more about because you have previously been at Y-High, but if you are new to Y-High, the OPCVO method for analyzing a document is the method that is used by the IB program. So, when you analyze a document, regardless if it's primary or secondary, it doesn't matter. Any document that you analyze, you will always use the OPCVO method. So, what is the OPCVO method? Well, first thing you will do, you will read a document. And when we say read a document, you don't just read the actual passage. You need to read the information at the beginning. And the reason why is because that's going to usually tell you who wrote the document, where they were. Is it a book? Is it an article? Is it a journal? Is it a lecture? What is it? So you need to find out who the person is. The reason why we have you read the entire document is because the only way you can do so is to find out what the origin is, because the origin is who created it, who is the author, when was it created, when was it published, where was it published. So origin is all of that. So you need to look at, when you read a document, what is the origin of this document. Secondly is the P, the purpose. Why was it written? Why does this document exist? Why did the author choose this particular format? Why didn't they go a different route? Why did they not do a poster, perhaps? Who is the intended audience? Who is this person speaking to? Who is the author thinking would receive this? Were they trying to write to this particular audience, or maybe they were writing to this audience? You need to remember these things, that usually when people write something, you're going to write one way when you're delivering a letter to, say, a personal audience that knows you on a much deeper and personal level, as opposed to writing a letter to someone who doesn't know you on that deeper of a personal level. And then lastly, we have the content. What does this document say? What's inside of it? What does it talk about? Put it in historical context. Is it part of the Protestant Reformation? Is it part of the Vietnam War? Is it part of the Civil Rights Movement in the United States? Where does it go historically? So when you're reading a document, those are the questions that you're going to look at to find out what the origin is, what the purpose is, what is the content. And these three parts are perhaps the easiest to find. However, this is the key part. You will use the origin, the purpose, and the content. You will use these three to show how valuable and how limited this document is. So keep this in mind. Once you find the origin, purpose, and content, you're only partially through. Okay, so this is not a complete analysis, because this is a limited analysis. So now you have to take this limited analysis of origin, purpose, and content, and then give it a critical analysis. And that is where you're going to use the origin, the purpose, and the content to decide if the document is valuable or if it is limited. So the values and limitations of the document is the most important. Okay, because like I said, finding origin, purpose, and content is very minimalistic. Okay, it's the easiest thing to do. But when you're looking at values, you need to think about questions, and I'm not going to read all of these, but just think like, how is this source useful in learning about this topic? Does the author present a particular side or controversy? What was going on in history at the time? Again, these are all things that are background questions that you're going to be asking. Same thing with limitations. What part of the story can we not tell from this document? What is purposely omitted or left out? So these are things that are you're going to be thinking about it. That, well, with this, if you can't figure out why a document is limited, then think about this. What part of the story can we not tell? How can we verify that this is a content? Verify the content of this piece. How can we verify it? Does this piece accurately reflect something? Same thing with values. If you can't figure out if a document is valuable or not, then ask yourself these questions. What can we tell about any controversies? Under what circumstances was this piece created? What can we tell about the author's perspective? Those type of questions will help you understand why a document's valuable or limited. Okay, but when you're asking those questions, you're going to be asking those questions with regard to origin, purpose, and content. So when you're asked, how is this source useful, then look at the origin. You know, if Thomas Jefferson was the person who did this, it's probably something that's very, very useful for a historian, as opposed to if it's, Meemaw or Peepaw down the street giving their, opinions on a particular historical event. Now, on the IB exam, you will actually have a question that will ask you to OPCVL a document. So therefore, this is a skill you will be tested on. I can tell you that already. So this is a skill you must master in order to be successful in this class. So when you complete an OPCVL exercise, it will always be 2 paragraphs. So if I tell you you're ever having an OPCVL exercise, the first thing that needs to pop into your mind is that you will always write 2 paragraphs, period, in a discussion. You will have one that is going to be a paragraph for values, and the other paragraph will be for limitations. So in this particular example, we're going to look at the first paragraph, which we'll have for values. And so it is very simple in how you will approach writing this paragraph. It could be as simple as you can clearly start out with, this source originates from blah, blah, blah. You'll put in, Thomas Jefferson, Martin Luther King, whatever, whoever's speaking it, whatever. And it is valuable to a historian because, and then you'll write, a little blurb here about why that document would be important to a historian because it was coming from Martin Luther King's mouth, or it would be valuable to a historian because Thomas Jefferson wrote it. Explain more about that. Then you could go on to the next thing and saying, and this source's purpose was to la 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 la, which is also valuable to a historian because it did la 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 la. And so now you have, if you can see here, in just these 2 things so far, you have already, in 1 paragraph, you have given me the origin of this document. You have given me the purpose of this document. You have also given me a value of this origin. And you've also given me a value of the purpose. And so you're already mostly there. Now we just have to go to the content. So in content, this is just some things for you to think about if you're trying to figure out where to get some content. You can think of the tone and the mood of the author. Were they angry, factual, emotional, touchy, feely, that kind of thing. And the origin or purpose of the source. Is it positively affects the content in this source for a historian because? So this is a sentence that you could start with. You could say, the origin positively affects the content in this source for a historian because. So you're going to tell us a little bit about what this document says. You'll say, for example, if it was Declaration of Independence, then your content would say, the Declaration of Independence lists several grievances the colonists had, several of which would be an example A and example B. The content of this source is going to be valuable to a historian to studying the Revolutionary War because of blah, 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 blah. So then you could say, the origin positively affects the content. So because it was written by Thomas Jefferson, this is a positive thing because blah, blah, blah. So this is how you will go about doing it. You can clearly see that you have the origin and the purpose, and then you have 2 values. And then once you have content, then you will also you tell us how it's valuable, and you will have OPC, and then you have your V. Now we'll just have to move on to the L, which is limitations. And here with limitations, you're going to do the same exact things as you did before. You will say, another origin of this source is blah, 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 which is a limitation because. So you're going to look at one particular document, and then you're going to come up with, an origin of the document. And this origin can be both valuable and limited. And so you try to look to see if you can find another type of origin. And remember, that's why you had there's several questions to ask about origin. So it's not just who was it. So perhaps who wrote it or who spoke it was a value. But perhaps the origin, the time period, is a limitation. because perhaps it's so far away, or perhaps it's in an area of the world that we can't really get a lot of information from. I mean, that's definitely a limitation. So you see how one document can have several different origins. How the origin of who wrote it is a value, but how the origin of where it's located is a limitation to someone because we can't get it or it's too far away. That's how you would go about doing this. Same thing with a purpose. Another purpose is to la 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 la, which is a limitation. So again, you would try to find two different purposes. That's why you have multiple questions that we asked in previous slides about different purposes so that you can find different purposes. And so you could say this purpose was of value to this historian, but in the same coin, this type of purpose would also be a limitation. And then lastly, you would do the same thing with content. Again, you would find content within the document that could be a limitation to a historian that's trying to study this particular event. Okay, so now we can see it is time for skill practice. And so the skill practice will require for you to pause the video. So if you will, pause the video and you want to read this passage. By the way, before you pause, this passage is a direct source from a previously released IB exam. So this is exactly the type of document that you will be using and be seeing on an IB exam and be asked to OPCVL. In fact, this very document was one that students were asked to OPCVL on a previous IB exam. So pause the video and just read this document. And in a moment, we're going to show you how to do an OPCVL for this document. So with the previous document, here is the question that was actually given by the IB. And again, this is a real IB question. With reference to its origin, purpose, and content, analyze the value and limitations of source P for an historian studying the Bantustan system. Now, granted, you haven't been taught what the Bantustan system is or was, so I understand that. But long story short, Bantustans were divisions of land that white South Africans had created to force black Africans to move to in the 1950s and 60s. So basically, it's very similar to the American government forcing Native Americans onto reservations. This is very similar to white South Africans forcing black Africans onto reservations called Bantustans. Okay, so that's basically what that was. But in the document you just read, why would this be? Let's do an OPCVL. So a paragraph for values. Well, first of all, Beck is a historian. So he is somebody who is learned. He knows about this information. He is writing a book in 2000, so it's plenty of years removed from it. So there's been lots of analysis for this type of document. And so Beck is obviously a learned individual, so this would be a value. The purpose of this particular document is to explain the Bantu Self-Government Act, and I think it did a very good job. It actually explained it very, very well. So this is going to be a value to a historian studying Bantustans. And the content talked about the limited amount of land with just, gave some statistics. It talked about 13.7% of the land that was left over was actually used. It also talked about how the Prime Minister Verwoerd is how you pronounce his name. He talked about decolonizing, so he was even using that term. So it actually gave specific terms and evidence. So this would be a value to a historian that would, this document would be a value to them because it does have some actual concrete evidence in the document itself. Now let's take a look at why this same document could be a limitation for a historian. So again, this is the same exact document, and we still have to also show how the origin, purpose, and content could also be a limitation. But you can't just say, because you just said that the origin was Mr. Beck and he's a historian and da-da-da-da-da, well, you can't just go back and say, well, that's also a limitation. That's why you have to have a different origin. That's why there's multiple questions that you ask about origin. So this document that you just read is actually coming from an academic textbook. So that is an origin. It's coming from an academic textbook. And so Beck has written this book called History of South Africa back in 2000. It is an academic book. So this is a limitation. And the reason being is because we're not getting this information from a primary source. This is Beck's interpretation of past events. So this is an academic book, and it is a limitation to a historian because it's not the actual evidence that we're looking for. In terms of the purpose, of course, we already established what a purpose was earlier and how that could be of a great value to a historian. But one of the purposes is the audience. Well, this is written, it's an academic book. So this book is written for academic audiences. So the average schmo, Joe Schmo on the street, is not going to read this. And so this is going to be perhaps a limitation to a historian because the audience was written for academics. And so maybe there are things that have been left out of this document, which kind of brings us to the next one down here in content. And so black voices are missing. Well, the title of the textbook or the book was The History of South Africa, and black voices are missing. I mean, that's just ironic in and of itself. So you could also come back and say, well, black voices are missing in this document, and that is a limitation to an historian who is trying to learn more about the Bantustan system. So now you have two different ways, an example here of how to do both a values paragraph and a limitations paragraph with one exact document. So here is where you would just kind of begin writing a paragraph, with reference to its origin and purpose. And so you would start with a paragraph about values, and you would make sure that this document, its origin is here, and it is a value because, and then it was purpose. The purpose of the document is this way, and its value is this. Here's something about the content, and it is valuable because of that. Then you would have your second paragraph, which is your limitations. This this document has an origin, but this origin could also be limited. This document's purpose, another example of a purpose, and this is how it is limited, and same thing with content. So this is just where you would write a paragraph about that. So you would take the graphic organized from the previous two slides and then put it into paragraph format. So, this does conclude lesson 1.8 Historical Thinking Skills Part 2. Now, again, this is very rudimentary and you're just starting out. So, do not be frustrated if you don't get it right the first few times. We have 2 full years to get this right. So, we're going to ease you into it. So, eventually, we're going to start grading with you easy. But eventually, as we get more and more through it, you'll get more acclimated to it and you'll get much more comfortable. So, our lesson has concluded for today. Can you effectively analyze a document using the OPCVL method by providing the following information: the origin, purpose, and content of the document? And can you tell us how the document is also valuable and limited? If you can, pat yourself on the back. You're doing an amazing job. At this point, this concludes unit number 1. So at this point, you'll just refer back to me for any information about upcoming assessments that you may have for this unit. Thank you so much for your time and have an amazing day.